You ready? Phil Spaugy, and I started working here in 1973, which would be 43 years. Yep, April 73.
And the airport has changed dramatically.
It has. It has. As
Sweet.
have I. Yeah,
That's
there's
right.
that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So yes, yes, it has. It's gone through a lot of different phases, changes. Of course, our concentration and my concentration has always been on the general aviation phase of it, so end of it. So I've seen a lot of things come and go. The rise and fall of charter departments that are based on the field. At one time, aviation sales had a real strong charter presence, whether it was with freight or passengers, which ended in 2001. Not caused by 911, but just caused by changes in the air charter business. So that's gone, and it's kind of interesting. No one has ever come into the market and replaced when we folded up our piston engine based charter department. There's some high-end jet charter companies on the field now, but it has been replaced. So kind of shows you that segment of the business was going by and by then.
Right.
I started here. When I started here, I was just in high school. I started as a lineman, pumping fuel for Bob and Gwen Netzley, who owned the company at the time. Aviation Sales had been founded in 1957 at Dayton Wright Brothers from Montgomery County Airport. Bob and Gwen had worked for Boss Kettering and helped build that airport for him. And as things changed, they ended up here and built this facility at Dayton International in 1966. Even though they had been on the airport in some of the older hangars, post or left over from World War II hangars since about 1962 or 63. But we'll cover that in Bob's history. But started here pumping gas because I needed a job. It's about that simple.
So you grew up around the airport.
Yep. I'm a graduate of Vandalia Butler High School. I'm one of the few graduates, I guess, that we were the aviators and became aviators. There's a few of us that got into the aviation business in one form or the other. But it's been an interesting journey. I was here for a year or so. Then I went to work for a company by the name of Summit Airlines. And they flew two Shorts 300 Skyvans, which are the short stubby Skyvans. And they were actually the first company ever to fly Emory freight off of Dayton International. And this was a long time before the hub was ever built, so you can't get confused there. But we flew two routes a night, one Dayton, Milwaukee, Chicago, Dayton, and then the other one Dayton, Pitt, Philadelphia, back through Pitt and back through Dayton. And
all in one night.
Yep, all in one night. We had 4 pilots, and I was hired as their station agent, and that's when I left aviation sales the first time. That was a great deal. I mean, I was only 20 years old or so at the time. Got paid $175 a week, which is big money, and got to fly along on these trips every night. And
this was what year?
1974.
Okay, great.
And
a lot of money in there.
yeah, it was. I mean, I think I was making $1. Now, when I left here to go to work for them, I think I was making about $2 an hour here. So it was a good experience. Unfortunately, after about 6 months with them, we stopped getting paid. And eventually the pilots started to quit and they pulled the airplanes out of Dayton. So it ran probably all told a year of flying the freight. I came to work for them because they needed some ground support and they had already been here a while. So.
Did you fly every night?
Yep. We could fly along. One of the interesting stories is at the time I was just about ready to get my private pilot license, and we had one crew member quit. And instead of sending out a crew person, another crew member, they just said just have Phil in as a co-pilot. You got to understand these airplanes, it had no autopilots, and they were pilot and co-pilot airplanes. So I got a lot of good experience that summer, especially in thunderstorms, which probably is the reason I didn't choose to fly for a living, because There was one night in particular over the middle of Lake Michigan that it was really pretty terrifying. We got into a cell, but anyhow.
Was this before they started flying around thunderstorms?
Well, these guys, yeah, and we had no radar on these airplanes, so you had to, you relied on whatever center was going to tell you about deviating. And these guys that flew the airplanes, I mean, a couple of them were Vietnam vets, and I mean, a couple of them they just weren't right in the head sometimes. I mean, they just knew fear. They just cinched down the seat belts and let's go.
Now, was
Pull
that
the power
airplane
back.
built to handle that kind
Yeah,
of
I
weather?
mean, it's a solid airplane, but it's built like a little box with wings, and
Yeah.
it's really over-engineered. But at the same time, when you're getting plus or minus 3,000 to 4,000 feet a minute because you're in a cell, and you're just sitting there, there's nothing you can do but just sit there and watch it go. I mean, you can't over control the airplane.
Right.
So, but anyhow, at the end of that, I was looking for a job, and Bob and Gwen contacted me to come back to do their charter dispatching. They had a flourishing charter department at that time. Their number one competitor, Skyways, which was next door in the oldest buildings of Dayton International at that time, went out of business suddenly in 1974. They had been here since the late 40s, and just one day we walked in and the doors were shut. And so we took over that facility and we called it Air Flight. And Skyways had been a Piper dealership, so now we had a Piper dealership and flight school, and we had a Cessna dealership and flight school. And Air Flight lasted, they kept that going for maybe a year. And one of the things I did, I dispatched at that time for them. Then I worked a weekend day. I was the de facto line supervisor at Air Flight. The line crew consisted of one person, and that was me. And it's interesting to note the girl that worked the desk on weekends was Candy Barnett, and Candy's now a senior captain with JetBlue. So,
That's right. You told me that.
Yep, she lives down in Centerville.
Yeah.
So I came back to do the dispatching, and that was an interesting deal because I was pretty young, and we had a charter department of probably 6, 7 airplanes at the time. We were just buying some Twin Beaches to do some heavier lift cargo than the Cessna 310 and 402s could do. And to dispatch and quote trips at that time, I was given a wall map, a book of airline distances between cities, which was published by the U.S. government, and a Texas Instrument calculator. And that's how you quoted the trips. I mean, you used the airline distances between cities, which wasn't airport to airport.
Right.
It was center of city and center of city.
Okay.
And then you used a string on the map.
Right.
And then that's how you gave your quotes. By the time I got done dispatching, and I dispatched from 74 until about, I'm trying to remember now, about the late 80s, early 90s, I dispatched more than 35,000 charter trips off of Dayton International. And knock on wood, we didn't have any incidents to speak of. We had some things happen, but like the wheel that came off of the 402 on takeoff, but there were some, those were just no harm on those things. Time rolled on. At that time, when I came back, Bob and Gwen had retired, and their son, Bob Nestle Jr., had taken over the company, and as manager, and Bob and Gwen retired to Florida. And Bobby, who sadly passed away last year, really was a mentor to me. He helped me a lot. He paid for some college down at Sinclair. They just opened their aviation administration program, which I went into, didn't graduate, but went down there and paid for some flying for me. But it just didn't work out with his folks being in Florida and Bobby running the company. And so in 76, they suddenly returned, and I knew they were coming back, and I needed a job. In my at 22, I'm thinking, well, they're not going to fire their son, and the only place he can go in the company is do what I'm doing, is dispatching, so I need another job. So I left. Went to work and drove a Coke truck for 6 months until Gwen called me back and said, we want you to come back and do our dispatching. And I said, what about Bobby? And she said, you both can dispatch. And we're going to, and Bobby has been told that he needs to find a job. Actually, what she told him, he was going to fire his ass, but that's... So Bobby and I co-dispatched for about 3 months. It didn't work out real well, but he finally left. Went to work for a trucking company, and by the time he was done, he had founded his own trucking company, and he sold it, and he retired young. And again, sadly, he passed away way too young. But so now I was back. Bob and Gwen were back. It's about 76. I'm still dispatching. They made me general manager, which, I mean, didn't add as a nice title, in the late 70s, she had her daughter, Roberta, and her son-in-law, Bill Thompson, joined the company. Roberta came in as a vice president. Bill came in as a vice president, or as a secretary-treasurer, and then they promoted me to vice president in the early 80s. And they had another partner at that time by the name of Ralph Leslie, and they bought Ralph out in 82, and that's basically when all these changes kind of took place. And it's clear Bob and Gwen were, trying to set a structure so they could retire again to Florida.
Yeah.
And they did. And 1980 came, and we got a call from the city of Dayton to go down to Dayton Wright Brothers again, Flightways, which is an operator that had been founded in 1976, lasted 4 years, went out of business. So we went down to Dayton Wright Brothers, and we've been there since that time till today as operating the FBO down there.
Okay. Let me